This past Sunday, the New York Times did something unprecedented, something it had never before done in its 171-year history. They published an article on the front page, above the fold, entirely in Yiddish. And it made that article free on its website as well, so that it could be easily accessed by anyone and everyone, regardless of whether or not they subscribe to the Times. Of course, that article was also published in English, but the Times felt very strongly that the article should be available and accessible to Yiddish speakers because it was about the Yiddish-speaking ultra-Orthodox community in New York. And frankly, they are the ones who need to hear the message that this article conveys the most. For more than a year, reporters at the Times interviewed over 275 people, translated dozens of Yiddish language documents, and analyzed millions of rows of data to produce a scathing expose on the state of failing Hasidic private schools, yeshivas, in New York's ultra-Orthodox community. And unfortunately and tragically, while these schools may prepare their students very well for a life of studying Talmud, their graduates are not even remotely equipped to become functioning members of American society. In 2019, after extensive pressure from the state of New York, the Central United Talmudical Academy in Monsey, which is a school of over 1,000 students, agreed to administer state-approved standardized tests to their student body to assess their students' aptitude in basic math and English skills. And every single one, literally every single one of over 1,000 students failed that test. And they're not alone. Over a dozen other comparable schools in New York had very similar test results in 2019. And why did thousands of students fail these basic aptitude tests? Because their schools offer essentially no secular education whatsoever. They teach very, very little English and math, and virtually no science and history. And as a result, these schools produce thousands of graduates every year with no ability whatsoever to navigate the outside world. They barely speak English, they have no basic math skills, and because of that, they have no choice but to remain in their insular Hasidic communities. And since they have no ability to get a real job, poverty rates in the Hasidic communities in New York are among the highest in the state, if not the country. And most tragically, as this article highlighted, it's a self-perpetuating cycle that becomes nearly impossible to break. Generation after generation are stuck in this system with no clear way out. As Chaim Fishman, a graduate of Yeshiva Kehilat Yaakov in Williamsburg, told the Times, "I'm the third generation born and raised in New York City, and when I was 15 years old, I could barely speak English." For the article, the Times interviewed a number of former Hasidic men who have left the community, and one of them managed to escape all the way to Montreal, far away from his family, but he was homeless for the first few months he was there. He literally had to sleep on park benches. As he told the New York Times, "I didn't have a job, I didn't have a bank account, I didn't have references, I didn't have any of that because I didn't know what any of that was. I had no knowledge of how to speak to people." That's the legacy that his education left him. And as I read this article this week, as I imagine many of you did, it was a very prominent article that received a lot of press, I felt profoundly sad. Sad for the victims of this system, sad for the taxpayers of New York State who are helping to fund this educational travesty, but mostly sad that this is something that's happening to our fellow Jewish people right here, right under our noses, and there's really nothing that we can do about it. There's no clear solution to this terrible problem. In his very famous ladder of tzedakah, the ladder that Zeke actually referenced in his Dvar Torah this morning, Maimonides teaches that the highest level of giving, even higher than making an anonymous donation, is empowering someone to become financially self-sufficient. Giving someone the ability to stand on their own 2 feet, strengthening someone's hand so that they can make a living for themselves. Maimonides unequivocally teaches that that is the highest level of tzedakah that a person can perform. And I thought about that a great deal as I was reading this very long expose in the Times this past week. Do the heads of these yeshivot realize that they are doing precisely the opposite of what our tradition teaches they should be doing? By depriving students of basic educational skills that they need to stand on their own 2 feet, in my opinion, the heads of these schools are performing not a mitzvah, but in fact are committing a grievous sin. In this week's Torah portion, Parshat Ki Tavo, we are once again presented with what is arguably the key theme of the book of Deuteronomy, bracha and klala, blessing and curse. The Torah tells us that once the Israelites cross the Jordan River and enter the land of Israel, they shall be split in 2, and 6 tribes will stand on Har Gerizim, and 6 tribes will stand on Har Eval, and the Levites will stand between those 2 mountains and recite the very long list of blessings and curses that we read this morning. And the people will receive blessings if they observe God's law and walk in God's ways, and they will be cursed if they spurn God's law and diverge from God's path. If we observe God's law, the Torah tells us, our crops will grow, we will have many children, and we will live long and prosperous and healthy lives. But if we reject God's law, our crops will wither and die, we will suffer terrible disease, and our enemies will defeat us. And we, the readers of this text, are supposed to envision ourselves as standing between these 2 great mountains. Mount Gerizim, representing blessing, and Mount Eval, representing curse. And it's up to us to choose which mountain we will ultimately stake our claim on, which path we will ultimately walk down, the path of blessing or the path of curse. As our tradition teaches, hareshut b'yedchem, that choice is in your hands. And in a comment on Parshat Ki Tavo, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs suggests that we shouldn't read this week's Torah portion with its list of blessings and curses as a fire and brimstone sermon. It's not supposed to be read as, do this, or else terrible things will happen to you. Rather, the passage in Ki Tavo recounting the curses is supposed to be read as an impassioned plea from God to the Israelites, coming from a place of profound love. It's God pleading with the Israelites like a parent pleading with a difficult child, saying, please, please, I'm begging you, make the right choices. Walk down the right path. I love you, and all I want is to see you flourish and prosper. Because if you make the wrong choices, then I assure you, your life will be one that is defined by pain and suffering and hardship, and neither of us want that. That's the way you're supposed to read the list of curses in this week's parasha. And I think that's what the Times was setting out to accomplish with their expose this week. It was intended as a shofar blast, a wake-up call to the ultra-Orthodox community. The Times is telling them that if they continue down the path they're currently on, life is only going to get harder. The Hasidic community in New York is very clearly at a crossroads, standing between these 2 metaphorical mountains, Har Gerizim and Har Eval, between bracha and klala, blessing and curse. And I sincerely hope they do the right thing and pivot towards the path of blessing. Rosh Hashanah is just a little more than a week away, and now is the time of year when we engage in what is known as cheshbon hanefesh, personal reflection, spiritual introspection. And of course, it's no coincidence that we read the list of blessings and curses as we approach the beginning of the Jewish New Year. In the past year, how have we chosen to embrace the path of blessing? What have we done to ensure that we don't walk down the path of curse? And what can we do to help ourselves be certain that we will only make the right decisions in the year ahead? As the Torah reminds us, and as I remind you very often from this bima, hareshut b'yedchem, that choice lies in your hands. And there's no better time to start making the right choices than today. Shabbat Shalom.